Greeting and salutations. I am Lloyd, a producer at LCD Productions, and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with flotations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United daily animation series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is the desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey.
Good day. This is Live to Tape. We're recording the visual audiobook of the Airship Golden Hind. This is in partnerspace with Project Aerospace. And let's begin. Chapter 9. The Escape of Enrico Jarvis. What are those blighters doing? Hold on. I gotta send the tweet out. I forgot to do that. What are those blighters doing? Soliloquied Caton for the 12th time. Are they buying the place, or are they puddle fracking? They ought to have been back hours ago. It was well after sunset. The Golden Hind had taken in stores of provisions and had replenished their fuel and oil tanks. An anchor watch had been set, and having gone the rounds in order to satisfy himself that everything was in order, Kenneth Canaan had gone to his cabin to write letters that would be sent ashore, when the picket boat brought off the skipper and Branstein. A shrill blast from the voice tube whistle made Caton hasten across the long, narrow cabin. There was something insistent about this summons. It was not the discreet, apologetic thrill the lookout man gave when he wished to report some trivial incident to the officer of the watch. "Hello," replied Kenyon. "We're adrift, sir," announced the man excitedly, telling the lookout to call the duty watch. Kenyon replaced the whistle in the mouth of the voice tube, struggled to get his leather, fur-lined coat, and hurried to the navigation room. As he passed the various motor rooms, he noticed that the air mechanics of the duty watch were already at their posts, awaiting order to get the engines running. Throwing open one of the windows, Kenyon looked out into the night. There was no staging, bittering wind. Drifting with the breeze, the airship was apparently motionless, save for a gently undulating movement, but the merest glance served to corroborate the lookout man's word. Already the Golden Hind, having risen to 6,000 feet and still climbing, was well to the south end of Europa Point. He could see the lighthouse on the southern-western point of the peninsula of Gibraltar steady receding as the airship approached the African coast. Kenyon was on the point of telegraphing for half speed ahead when he bethought him of the cable. More than likely, he decided, the wire rope had parted halfway between the nose and the fuselage and the buoy. There was danger in comparative light, springly wires getting foul of the forward propellers, stranded wires apt to play hanky-panky tricks. "Get the cabin inboard," he ordered. "Don't use the wrench, or you won't get the wire to lie evenly on the reel. Haul it in by hand." Two of the crew descended to the bow compartment, which, beside forming living room for the men, contained the cable wrench. "Get it in by hand," he said, remarked one of the men to his companion. "Blimey, there ain't aft strain on the blessing thing. Bear and chum." Presently one of the men returned to the navigation room. "Pardon, sir," he said, saluting, "but we can't hold the wire in. It's foul of something. Shall we bring it to the rent, sir?" "Foul of something, eh?" echoed Canyon. "Does that mean we've hiked up the blessed mooring buoy? Switch on the bow searchlight, Jackson." The order was promptly obeyed, and the rays of 10,000 candle-power lamps were directly vertically downward. Leaning well on the open window, Kenyon peered along the glistening length of the tattered cable until, parting from the convergence rays of searchlight, it vanished into space. 2 degrees left, ordered Kenneth. "Good at that. By Jove, what is it? That a man?" Filled with a haunting suspicion that the suspended body might be that of his chum, Peter, Kenyon felt his heart jump into his throat, but a second glance at the motionless figure slowly resolved at the end of the cable relieved Kenneth's mind on that score. Still, it was a human being in dire peril. "Heave away handsomely," continued Caden. "Stand by to avast heaving," he added. The orders were communicated to the hands at the cable wrench. Steadily the wrench motor cranked away till the word was passed to vast heaving. The luckless individual at the end of the wire was now dangling 30 feet below the bows of the fuselage. It would have been useless to have hauled him out to Hansi Pipe, because there would be no means of getting him on board. The only practical way to reach him was by lowering a rope from the trap door on the other side of the chassis, midway between 2 pipes in the bow. Meanwhile, Canyon was deftly making ballast on the blade, an extremity of 2/3 manila ropes. "Jackson," he said, addressing the leading hand of the duty watch, "I'm going after that chap. Tell off a couple of men to attend to each of the ropes. If I make a mess of things and don't get back, keep the ship ahead to winds till daylight, and then make for our former mooring. There'll be plenty of help available." Adjusting one of the loops under his arm and another round his leg above his knees, Kenneth slipped through the narrow trap hatch, taking the second rope with him. It was a weird sensation dangling in space with about 8,000 feet of empty air between him and land or sea, for by this time the Golden Hind was probably over the Africa coast. But soon the eerie feeling passed, and Kenneth, courageous, cool-headed, and accustomed to dizzying heights, had no thought but for the work in hand. "At that," he shouted, when he found himself on the same level with the man he hoped to rescue, "take a turn." 10 feet from him was the unconscious Enrico Jarvis. The question now was, how was that interweaving space to be bridged? Canyon began to sway his legs after the manner of a child on a swing. "If the rope parts, then it's a case of going west with a vengeance," he soliloquized grimly. "Christopher, isn't it beastly cold?" Momentarily, the pendulum-like movement increased until Kenneth was able to grip the arm of the unconscious man. As he did so, Enrique's belt had hitherto prevented him dropping into space, parted like a pack thread. With a jerk that nearly wrenched the rescuer's arm from their sockets, the dead weight of the corpse almost capsized Keaton out of his bowline. As it was, he was hanging with his head lower than his feet, holding on with the grip of iron to Jarvis' arms. Thus hampered, he realized that it was manifestly impossible to make use of the second bowline. "Haul up," he shouted breathlessly. "Heavens," he added, "can I do it? Can I hold on long enough?" It was a question that required some answering. The strain on his muscles, coupled with the effect of the unexpected jerk, the numbing cold, lastly his own position as he hung practically head downwards, all told against him. Even in those moments of peril, he found himself thinking he must present a ludicrous sight for the watchers in the airship in the dazing glare of the searchlight. "Stick it another half a minute, sir," shouted a voice. "I'll be with you in a brace of shakes." Of what happened during the next 30 long drawn-out seconds, Caden only had a hazy recollection. He was conscious of someone brawling in his ear. "Let's go, sir. I've got him all right." Kenneth obeyed mechanically. In any case, he was on the point of relaxing his grip through sheer inability on the part of his muscles to respond to his will. The sudden release of the man had rescued resulted in Canyon regarding a normal position, and dizzy and utterly exhausted, he was hauled to safety. Someone give him brandy. The strong spirit revened him considerably. Where's the fellow? He asked. Safe, sir, replied Jackson. Shall I carry on? Yes, please, said Kenneth faintly, and with the clang of the telegraph indicator bells and the rhythm purr the motors bore to his ears, he became unconscious. Meanwhile, Enrico Jarvis, to all outward appearance, a corpse, had been hauled on board. One of the crew, observing Kenneth's plight, had descended by means of another rope and had deftly hitched the end round the corpse's body, climbing back hand over hand as unconcernedly as if he had been walking upstairs in his cottage in far-off Albertstein. Like Handel in Frozen Munting, commented one of the crew as they attended to the rescued Jarvis. Fine specimen, ain't he? And what he's doing with that marine spike, I should like to know. Ain't all Jonic, if you ask me. Chapter 10. Under Examination. I'm all right, I tell you. Hang it all, I can't fellow know what he's all right. Thus Canaan rather resentfully resisted all efforts on the part of the men to keep him in his bunk. He came from an indomitable stock that never readily admits defeat, and on this occasion he steadfastly refused to recognize the fact that his physical strength had been well nigh snapped. Donning his leather coat, he made his way to the navigation room, staggering slightly as he passed along the narrow alleyway. Wireless message that received, sir, reported Jackson, from TBD, Zenberg, to Golden Hind. Am approaching in search of you. Show position lights. Will transship Sir Reginald Forsyth and Mr. Branstein as soon as possible. Make necessary arrangements. We're steering north by west, 1/4 west, but we haven't sighted the destroyer yet. Very good, concurred Caden. Carry on. He consulted the altimeter and the speed indicator. The former showed that the airship had descended 2,000 feet, and the speed was 2,000 revolutions, or approximately 30 miles an hour. The Golden Hind had by this time retraced a good portion of her drift, and was now 3 or 4 miles from Crata. 10 minutes later, the mashed flashing lamp was seen blinking at a distance about 6 miles. The light came from the destroyer Zenberg, which, pelting along at 25 knots, was on the lookout for the airship. Kenneth Canyon was now on his mettle. For the first time he was in command of a large airship, about to make a descent. As an officer of the watch, he had already had the opportunity of observing the handling of the huge vessel, but now he found himself confronted with the problem of bringing her close to the surface of the sea, so as to enable the destroyer to maneuver sufficiently enough to establish direct connection. I hope I didn't make a bog of it, he soliloquized. I must admit, I feel a bit rotten after that little jamboree just now. Still, I stick it. Although he was not aware of the fact, leading, Hand Jansen was keeping a sharp eye on his superior officer, ready at the first sign to take on, should Kenton's physical strength fail him. For the next 10 minutes the greater activity prevailed. Gongs were clanging, crisp orders were issued through the various voice tubes. Gas was being withdrawn from the various outlets, and the motors were constantly being either accelerated or retarded according to the conditions demanded. The white flashing lamp signals were being exhausted with TBD, which had low circled 16 degrees to the starboard and was streaming slowly dead in the eye of the wind. In the floor of the bow compartment of the Golden Hind, the large trap hatch had been opened. Close by crouched men ready to lower away a wire rope, at the end of which a small electric bulb glowed to enable the destroyer's crew to locate the line in the dark. Throughout the maneuver, either the Golden Hind nor the Zenberg made use of their searchlights, since the dazzling rays might baffle the prospective helmsman and result in a collision. Slowly and gracefully the airship dropped until her fuselage was 30 feet from the surface of the sea. She was now dead in the wake of the destroyer, and the task that confronting Canyon was to bring her ahead sufficiently for the bows to overlap and the Zingberg's stern. An error of judgment at that low height could result in the airship bows fouling the destroyer's mast. Foot by foot, the Golden Hind gained upon the destroyer until a shout from the latter's deck announced that the wire rope had been made fast. Instantly, the airship's 6 motors were declutched, and she was now moving merely under the towing action of the Zinberg, which was forging ahead at bare 4 knots. From the trap hatch in the airship's bow, a rope ladder was lowered, and an end had by a couple of bluejackets on the TBD. Without loss of time, Forsyth swarmed up the swaying ladder and was followed by Bransdine. "Cast off, and thank you," shouted Baronet. "All gone," came an answering voice from Zinberg, followed by a hearty "best of luck to you." Release the Golden Hind leapt a full 500 feet into the air before the propellers began to revolve. "Cheerio, Kanan," exclaimed Forsyth as he joined Kenneth in the navigation room. "All well that's end well, but you gave me a pretty bad turn. What happened?" "Hardly know, sir," replied Canyon. "Our wire rope didn't part. Possibly the shackle on the buoy gave, but we found the man hanging on the end of the wire." "You did, eh?" exclaimed the baronet sharply. "What sort of man?" "You'll see," replied Kenneth. "He's laid out below." Ejaculated Forsyth, and relapsed into silence. He was deep in thought for some moment, then turned to Canyon again. "We're making an official start in a few minutes' time," he announced. "We have to pass over the rock and display 3 red and 3 white lights to the official observer on Signal Hill. When we see a familiar signal made from the rock, that will be our actual starting time. Pass the word for Jackson to get the lamps in position." At an altitude of 3,000 feet or 1,500 feet above the summit of the Rock of Gibraltar, the Golden Hind received her official send-off at 3:35 a.m., 18 hours after the Hun-owned Z-64. Evidently there was not a minute to be wasted. The contest had developed not merely into a voyage around the world within the space of 20 days, but a race in which the British competitor had to make good her formidable handicap of 18 hours, or approximately 3,500 miles. With the wind abeam on the port side of the Golden Hind opened out to 140 miles an hour. During the earlier stages of the race, Forsyth rather wisely decided to keep below the maximum speed, rather than overtax the motors by running them all out. Within a few minutes of receiving her official permit to depart, the airship lost sight of the lights upon the Rock of Gibraltar. She was now steering east by south, a course that would take her over the northern part of Algeria and Tunis and within a few miles of Malta. At 4 a.m., Canyon, who modestly refrained from giving any details of the part he had taken in the rescue of Enrico Jarvis, and had concealed the fact that he had been temporarily out of action, was relieved by Peter Bransdine. As he turned to go in his cabin, Kenneth saw the baronet was standing in a corner of the navigation room and studying a nautical almanac. "Sleep well, Canaan," exclaimed Fosterday. "You'll some errands to make up." "Rather, sir," agreed Canyon, "but we're forgetting something." What?" "The fellow we found hanging on to the wire rope. We didn't put him on board the destroyer." "No," agreed Forsyth grimly. "We didn't. I saw to that. Unless I'm much mistaken, our unwanted supernumerary can and must give us certain information that will rather astonish us. I'll see him later on, by Jove." Canyon nodded knowingly. Evidently Forsyth had learned something. However, as far as Canyon was concerned, other things of more pressing nature demanded his attention: food and sleep. At 8 o'clock, Forsyth ordered his involuntary guest to be brought before him. "There's something fishy about the breaking adrift business," he observed to Bransdine, as the two sat at the table in the after cabin waiting Enrico's appearance. "Where's Jackson? We'll want him." "No, don't disturb Canyon. he had a pretty sticky time. More than you, I imagine, sir, added Peter, and proceeded to tell the baronet the part Kenneth had played in the aerial rescue of the Imperial Rock Scorpion. Kenyon didn't say a word about it, he added, on the conclusion of the narrative. He was as mute as an oyster over it all. Frampton, the Collins told me, it was. A knock on the door. A knock on the cabin door interrupted Branston's explanation. "Come in," exclaimed Fordyke. In answer to invitation entered the leading hand Jackson, followed in a single file by one of the crew, Enrico Jarez, and two other members of the Golden Hind's company. The Scorps was still laboring under the effect of his narrow escape. He looked, to quote Branston's word, as if the stuffing had been knocked out of him. Fordyke's handling of the situation was a bold one. Without any preliminaries, without even asking the fellow's name, he demanded sternly, "How much did Count Karl von Sinzing promise you for last night's work?" Jarvis gave an involuntary start, but almost immediately relapsed into his impermeable passive attitude. Then, with a slight shrug of his shoulders, he replied, "Me no speak English." "Try again," said Forsyth, contracting his busy eyebrows and looking straight at the man. "All I can say is that if you don't speak English, it's a case of won't, not can't." "Me no speak English," reiterated Jarvis. Without speaking, Forsyth looked straight in the fellow for a full 30 seconds. During that period, Enrico attempted 3 times to meet the searching gaze of his inquisitor. "Now," exclaimed the baronet at length. Enrico maintained silence. Forsyth slowly and deliberately unstrapped his wristlets watch and placed it on the table. "I'll give you 30 seconds," he said, in level tones. 30 seconds in which to make up your mind, either to answer or refuse to answer my question. Might I remind you that you are now 8,000 feet above the sea, and it's a long drop, Jackson. Will you please remove the hatch?" "Of course, the old man was only kidding," remarked Jackson, when he related what had transpired to his companions after the affair was over. "But bless me, even I thought he might do it, the dirty sweep-in." He looked that stern that it would put the wind up the bloke straight away. Absolutely disciplined, the leading hand obeyed orders promptly. Throwing back the aluminum cover in the center of the cabin floor, he revealed the gaze of the thoroughly terrified Jarvis, a rectangular opening 6 feet by 4. Far below, glittering in the sunshine, was the blue Mediterranean. 5 seconds more," announced Forsyth calmly. Of the occupants of the after bin, Enrico Jarvis now seemed to be the least interested in the proceedings. His furtive glances had given place to an expression of lofty detachment, as if he were utterly bored with the whole transaction. Branston found himself deciding that either the fellow was an imbecile or else he was a past master in the art of dissimulation. "Time," declared Fordyke. Enrico Arias possibly beamed. "Me no speak English," he babbled. Sir Reginald eyed the accused sternly, but even his piercing glance seemed of no avail. The rock corpse continued to smile inanely. "Take him away," ordered Thorndyke with asperity. He waited till the door had closed, and the involuntary guest had then given a depreciatory shrug. "The fellow scored this time, Branston," he remarked, "but I'll get windward of him yet." Chapter 11. With Intent. "Where are we now?" inquired Kenyon, on returning to the navigation room to relieve his chum as officer of the watch. It was now 12 o'clock. Branston had just shot the sun and was reading off the degrees, minutes, and seconds from the arc of the sextant. "Almost over Algiers, old thing," he replied, pointing at the glaring sun-baked Algerian coast. "Hark!" He held up his hand and inclined his head sideways. Above the brass hum of the aerial propellers came the distant report of a gun. "Reminds a fellow of old times when the Archies got busy," remarked Kenyon. "Our friends the French were evidently treating us to a salute to help us on our weary way," rejoined Peter. "Goodness only knows how we are to return it. We can't give a gun for a gun." He focused his glass on the white building 3,000 feet below. The whole of the waterfront of Algiers was packed with figures with upturned faces, Frenchmen, Algerians, Arabs, Nubians, all frantically waving at the huge airship as she sped eastward. 10 minutes of In 10 minutes, the Golden Hind had left the capital of France, Africa's possession, far eastern. Unless anything untoward occurred, another 4 hours would bring her within sight of Malta. You might cast your eye over the signal logbook before you take on, remarked Branston. Kenyon did so. Evidently, the wireless operator had been kept busily employed, for there were dozens of messages wishing the Golden Hind bon voyage, but amidst them were two of a different nature. One announced that the American airship Eagle was under the command of Commander Theodore Nye, had left Tampa Town bound for Colon, followed by a supplementary message that the Eagle had left Panama Canal zone and was last sighted flying over in a westerly direction, making allowance for the difference in New York and Greenwich times. Both the Golden Hind and her Yankee rivals had started practically simultaneously from their respective points of departure for the actual race. The second wireless message, transmitted via Vancouver, Newfoundland, Poldo, was to the effect that the Banzai, the Japanese quadruplane piloted by Count Hirashi, had started from Nagasaki at speeds estimated at 220 miles an hour. Artful blighter, that Japanese, declared Branston. He's kept his design carefully up his sleeve till the last moment. We thought he was attempting the flight in an airship, but he pinned his faith to the gigantic quadruplane. 220 miles an hour, too, added Kenyon. That means he'll do the whole trip in less than 120 hours of actual flying, unless something goes wrong with his bus. My word, some speed. What I'd like to know is his petrol consumption. And how much juice does this bus carry? Remarked Branston thoughtfully. By Jove, we're up against something, old son. By and by, I see there's no news of Fritz, said Kenneth. Not a word, replied Peter. Von Singzing evidently thinks he's too early to start bragging. We'll hear either from or of him before night. Forsyth is trying to call him up by wireless and tell him he has a friend aboard on his board. Oh, that greasy merchant, rejoined Kenneth. How did he get on? Played possum, answered Branston. Forsyth tried to pull the wind up him, but it was a frost. I'd like to know what he did to get the shackles on his mooring buoy. Did you think he cast us adrift? Without a doubt, old bird. Kenyon shook his head doubtfully. He might have been simply fishing when the pin drew, and he got whisked aloft, he suggested. Did he give his name or any particulars? No, replied Peter. In fact, he wasn't asked. Forsyth went for him bald-headed and tried to make him admit that he was in von Singzing's pay, but nothing doing, even when we made out that we were going to drop him overboard. Well, cheerio, old thing. Left in charge of the airship, Kenyon pondered over the problem of whether the man he had rescued had really been a secret agent of von Singzing or otherwise. If he were, then it would be almost as a foregone conclusion that he spoke German. Kenneth had plenty of time for reflection during his trick. The Golden Hind was making good progress. There was little or no wind, and her drift was in consequence at most imperceptible, while the temporary was so constant that there was no necessity to alter their volume of barium in the ballots for hours at a stretch. The motors, too, ran like clockwork, and beyond attending to the semi-automatic lubricators, occasionally the air mechanics on duty had little to do. Forsyth, having paid a brief visit to the navigation room, retired to his cabin to make up errands of sleep. Might work, soliloquized Kenneth reflectively. I'll tackle Forsyth about it next time I come across him. At 4 in the afternoon, Malta was passed at a distance of 10 miles to the southward. The Golden Hind was doing well, maintained more than her normal cruising speed. If she were able to keep on at that rate, she would accomplish the voyage of circumnavigation well under the 20 days. But that was now but secondary consideration. At all costs, von Singzing's Z-64 must be overhauled. The Golden Hind's first stop was at Alexandria. 16 hours after leaving Gibraltar, she made a faultless landing on the sandy spit that separates Lake Marmot from the Mediterranean. This time of her arrival had been notified by the wireless, and all preparations had been made for her reception. Keenly interested, Tommy's manned the trail, ropes, and secured her firmly to anchor, buried in the sand. Lorries laden with petrol and oil were rushed to the spot, and the work of refueling began without delay. While Fordyke and Kenneth were singing the control certificate and holding the informational receipt of almost the whole of the British colony at Alexandria, Branston remained in charge of the ship. In order to keep back the dense crowd, composed of Felhan, Corps, Arabs, Syrians, and representatives of every nation bordering the Mediterranean, strong pickets of British troops were posted around the heathered airship, no unauthorized person being permitted to approach within 100 yards of the Golden Hind, while to enable the work of refueling to process as rapidly as possible, the improvised aerodrome was brilliantly illuminated by portable searchlights mounted on the motor lorries. It seemed as if it would be impossible for any suspicious character to approach the airship without being detected. Having once been bitten, Forsyth was not taking chances in that direction. No attempt had been made to get rid of Enrico Jarvis. Closely watched by a couple of the crew, he was even permitted to view the proceedings from an open scuttle in one of the compartments of the starboard side. When everything was in readiness to resume the voyage, Fordyke and Kenyon shook hands with their entertainers and crossed the guard lines squares. As they approached the entry point on the starboard side, of the dark figure suddenly appeared from behind an unattended lorry, and at a distance of 10 paces fired half a dozen shots in rapid succession straight at the baronet. Almost at the first report, Forsyth flew himself at full length upon the sand. Kenyon, without hesitation, rushed upon the would-be assassin, while two of the crew leaped from the fuselage, promptly seized the miscreant, and deprived him of his automatic pistol. "Hurt, sir?" asked Kenyon anxiously. "Not a bit of it," replied Sir Reginald coldly. "That fellow couldn't hit a haystack at 500 yards. Bring him along, men." The agitated member of the Egyptian civil service, accompanied by a couple of staff officers, hurried up after making inquiries, and learning that Fordyke was unhurt, suggested, not without good reason, that the would-be assassin should be handed over to the civil powers for trial. The baronet airily swept aside the suggestion. "Sorry, Van Start," he said, "but I'm not going to waste precious time appearing as a prosecutor in this business. No, I'm not exactly professional to come to the law into my... No, I'm not exactly professing to take the law into my own hands, but I propose taking the gentleman with me. If he tried to shoot me, surely I can jolly well kidnap him. Tarry rate, possession's nigh, point of the law. I've done with him, you can deal with him." "But dash it all, man," exclaimed one of the staff officers, "you aren't going to hang him?" "Not so much," declared the baronet. "Return good for evil, sort of thing, you know. Don't get flustered, Vagastart. He's mine, and we're just off." Happening to glance up as he entered the fuselage, Forsyth caught the sight of Enrico Jarvis, who had been seeing the whole incident through one of the windows. "Birds of a feather," he soliloquized. "However, I don't suppose we'll pick up pals of this sort at every place we touch." "All's ready?" Kenyon inquired, raising the voice. "Righto. Let's go." So that was it for this episode. The next part will be Chapter 11, Confidences.